He denounced the capitalist system, while corresponding with stockbrokers about market speculation. This was Karl Marx. The critic of bourgeois society maintained a Victorian household, complete with a lifelong housekeeper, while writing about working-class liberation. This was Karl Marx. The man who condemned private property lived off the profits of Manchester factories, funded by his friend Engels' family enterprise. This was Karl Marx. His private letters reveal a complex figure, far from the simple revolutionary portrayed in textbooks, a man whose personal life often contradicted his public philosophy. What documented history shows about Marx will challenge our understanding as not through rumours or speculation, but through his own words and actions. Most of us know Karl Marx through his writings: the Communist Manifesto that shook the world in 1848, Das Kapital, his critique of industrial capitalism, his theories of class struggle and worker exploitation that sparked global revolutions. But there was another Marx, revealed through his personal correspondence, documented in household records, and witnessed by his contemporaries. The Marx who wrote to Engels about speculating on the London Stock Exchange. The Marx who maintained social connections with the very industrialists he publicly condemned. The Marx whose lifestyle depended on the profits of the capitalist system he sought to overthrow. How do we know this? The evidence lies in over 4 decades of letters between Marx and Engels, in the meticulous records of his financial transactions, in the testimonies of those who knew him, and in the journals of his contemporaries. His letters to Engels reveal constant requests for money, while records show purchases of fine wines and cigars. His family's accounts detail a lifestyle that would have been impossible on a revolutionary's income. These aren't interpretations or theories, they're documented facts preserved in the British Museum, the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam, and the Russian State Archive of Socio-Political History. Now you might be wondering, how did the father of communism reconcile these contradictions? And more importantly, why has this side of Marx remained in the shadows for so long? In 1850, while thousands of working-class families crowded into London's squalid tenements, Karl Marx moved his family to Dean Street in Soho, a neighbourhood favoured by artists and intellectuals. His letters from this period reveal a lifestyle that seems strangely at odds with his revolutionary message. Engels' correspondence tells us of Marx's particular fondness for Chateau Margaux wine, and his insistence on finding the finest cigars, even during periods of supposed financial hardship. Anyone who wishes to get on in the world, Marx wrote to his uncle in 1869, must first get out of it. And get out of it he did. Think about this. While writing passionate condemnations of bourgeois excess, Marx maintained a lifestyle that would have been unimaginable to the workers he championed. His household accounts show regular purchases of luxury items, while his letters to Engels contain constant requests for more funds. But perhaps the most telling contradiction lies in his treatment of Helen de Muth. Known as Lenchen, she came to the Marx household as a young woman, sent by Jenny Marx's mother. For decades she cooked, cleaned and managed the household, without receiving regular wages. The woman who kept Marx's household running lived the very exploitation he denounced in his writings. What the textbooks don't mention is that while Marx wrote about the oppression of domestic servants, his own household relied on unpaid domestic labour. Lenchen wasn't alone. Other servants passed through the Marx household, their stories largely untold. Consider this. In 1867, the same year Das Kapital was published, Marx insisted on sending his daughter Jenny to an expensive private school. While writing about the need for universal education, he ensured his own children received the kind of privileged schooling he publicly criticised. The contradictions didn't end there. Marx's letters reveal regular dinner parties where philosophical discussions flowed as freely as the wine, gatherings attended not by revolutionary workers, but by the educated elite of London society. The same social class he argued would be overthrown by revolution. His residence at 9 Grafton Terrace in Kentish Town, a respectable middle-class neighbourhood, was maintained even during periods when he claimed desperate poverty in letters to Engels. Think about that. The man who wrote about the miseries of working-class housing insisted on maintaining appearances in London's better districts. Through his letters, we see Marx frequenting fashionable establishments, attending theatre performances, and maintaining the social obligations of a Victorian gentleman, all while depending on money generated by the very system he sought to destroy. Money that came primarily from the Engels family's factories in Manchester. the same factories whose conditions Marx used as examples of capitalist exploitation. This wasn't a brief period of contradiction. This was Marx's established way of life. For decades, he lived as a bourgeois intellectual while writing as a revolutionary prophet. The marriage of these contradictions defined not just his personal life, but arguably influenced the development of his entire philosophical system. The foundation of Marx's financial existence rested on a profound irony. His lifestyle was funded almost entirely by the profits of exploitation. In his published works, he condemned the cotton mills of Manchester. Yet it was these very mills, owned by the Engels family, that kept him afloat. Friedrich Engels, his closest friend and collaborator, sent regular payments to Marx. These weren't small sums. In today's terms, Engels provided Marx with the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars annually, all extracted from the surplus value of factory workers, the very system Marx condemned. Now, consider this contradiction. While writing about the evils of financial speculation, Marx's letters to Engels reveal his own market dealings. "I have, which will surprise you not a little, been speculating," he wrote to Engels in 1864. Conservative estimates suggest he committed several £100s to various stock market ventures. Here's what history classes skip over. Marx's correspondence reveals repeated attempts to secure inheritances from wealthy relatives. In 1861, he wrote excitedly to Engels about his expectations from his uncle's estate. While publicly denouncing inherited wealth as a tool of class oppression, despite receiving regular income from Engels and occasional windfalls, Marx remained constantly in debt. His letters are filled with urgent appeals for money. "I am in such distress about money matters that I literally don't know which way to turn," he wrote to Engels in 1865. Yet household records show continuous spending on luxuries. The contradictions deepen. While writing about the corrupting influence of gambling on the working class, Marx frequently visited the gaming tables. His letters mention evenings spent at clubs where gambling was commonplace, the revolutionary philosopher betting against the house with money from capitalist factories. What's particularly striking is Marx's attitude toward money. In private correspondence, he showed remarkable sophistication in financial matters. He discussed exchange rates, stock prices, and market trends with the expertise of a banker, all while publicly condemning such financial knowledge as tools of bourgeois oppression. His relationship with Engels' money reveals another layer of complexity. Engels didn't just support Marx. He rescued him from creditors, paid his medical bills, funded his family's vacations, and eventually left Marx's children an inheritance. All this wealth flowing from the very industrial capitalism that Marx predicted would collapse. Perhaps most telling are Marx's banking connections. His letters reveal relationships with various London financiers, the same men he publicly criticised as parasites of the capitalist system. Yet privately, he sought their advice on investments and financial matters. The paper trail tells an undeniable story. The father of communism lived on capitalist profits, invested in capitalist markets, and maintained relationships with capitalist financiers, while writing the very text that would call for their destruction. This wasn't just a philosophical contradiction. It was a way of life that spanned decades. The gap between Marx's public writings and private correspondence reveals a complex figure. His personal letters to Engels and others show a man far more nuanced and often contradictory than his published works suggest. In his private correspondence, Marx's views on social progress often diverged from his public positions. In an 1862 letter to Engels, he expressed doubts about the very working-class solidarity he championed in print. Writing about London workers who supported capitalist policies, he noted with frustration how they seemed to embrace the very system he believed should be their enemy. What scholars often overlook is Marx's pragmatic approach to wealthy supporters. While publicly condemning the bourgeoisie as a class, his letters reveal ongoing relationships with several industrialists. These weren't just casual acquaintances. They were sources of information about industrial practices and economic trends, information he used in Das Kapital. Think about this paradox. The man who wrote that religion was the opiate of the masses, maintained connections with religious reformers when politically expedient. His correspondence reveals a tactical approach to alliances that often contradicted his published principles. In his unpublished manuscripts and notes, we find Marx struggling with theoretical contradictions. His views on historical development show significant shifts over time. Yet these changes rarely appeared in his published works. The public Marx remained steadfast while the private Marx questioned and revised. His letters from the 1870s reveal another contradiction. While publicly predicting the inevitable victory of the proletariat, he privately expressed frustration with working-class organisations that didn't align with his theories. The English working class is becoming more and more bourgeois, he wrote to Engels, an observation that challenged his public narrative. Perhaps most revealing are his tactical political shifts. His correspondence shows how he adapted his positions based on changing political circumstances. While his published works presented absolute theories, his private letters reveal a man who understood the need for political flexibility. The evidence suggests a thinker far more aware of practical realities than his theoretical works indicate. A man who understood that the path to social change was more complex than his published works could admit. This wasn't mere hypocrisy. It was the complex reality of a philosopher grappling with the gap between theory and practice. Behind the fiery revolutionary rhetoric lay a network of relationships that would have surprised Marx's followers. His life in London included membership in the German Workers' Educational Society, yet he spent considerable time in venues frequented by the very class he criticised. Among his associates were wealthy supporters like Wilhelm Wolff, who later left Marx a substantial inheritance, the same inheritance system he condemned in Das Kapital. Now, you might ask yourself, how did Marx justify accepting such bourgeois patronage? His letters reveal regular meetings at London's intellectual clubs, places where industrialists and bankers mingled with writers and philosophers. In these spaces, Marx moved comfortably among the capitalist elite, gathering intelligence about industrial practices that would later appear in his writings. What your history books never mentioned was Marx's strategic approach to political alliances. While publicly advocating working-class solidarity, he maintained connections with reform-minded bourgeois politicians. His correspondence reveals careful cultivation of these relationships, even as his published works condemned their class. Contemporary critics noticed these contradictions. In 1850, August Willich, a former communist ally, publicly questioned Marx's lifestyle, pointing out how it contradicted his revolutionary teachings. Marx's response, documented in letters to Engels, showed more concern for his reputation than addressing the substance of these criticisms. The practical impact of these contradictions emerged in his theoretical work. His detailed understanding of factory conditions came not from personal experience with workers, but from Engels' reports as a factory owner. His analysis of financial markets stemmed from his own involvement in them, rather than from the perspective of those he claimed to represent. Think about the implications. The man who wrote that the workers have nothing to lose but their chains operated within a social network of the propertied classes. His understanding of capitalism came not from the factory floor, but from his connections to factory owners. His personal papers reveal another layer of complexity. While writing about the alienation of workers from their labour, Marx himself remained distant from working-class daily life. His theoretical work was developed in reading rooms and private studies, far from the industrial workplaces he analysed. These weren't merely personal contradictions, they shaped the very theories that would influence global movements. Marx's position as both critic and beneficiary of the capitalist system created a unique perspective, one that combined theoretical insight with practical compromise. The story of Karl Marx, as revealed through his letters, records and relationships, shows us something profound about the nature of historical figures. They are rarely as simple as their public images suggest. Here was a man who condemned the exploitation of workers while benefiting from factory profits, who wrote about class struggle while maintaining a bourgeois lifestyle, who criticised the financial markets while participating in them. These weren't mere inconsistencies, they were the complex realities of a life lived between theory and practice. So what does this mean for Marx's ideas? His insights into capitalism emerged not just from theoretical study, but from his personal experience within the system. His understanding of economic power came from both sides of the class divide. Perhaps these contradictions didn't invalidate his theories, but enriched them with practical insight. The letters, documents and testimonies we've examined don't diminish Marx's historical significance. Instead, they reveal a more human figure, a philosopher who struggled with the same systems he analysed, a revolutionary who never fully escaped the society he sought to change. Think about this. How much do we really know about any historical figure? How often do we accept simplified versions of complex lives? Perhaps understanding Marx's contradictions helps us better understand the enduring influence of his ideas. The true legacy of Karl Marx lies not in an idealized image, but in the complex reality of a man whose personal contradictions gave him unique insight into the contradictions of his time, and perhaps of our own.